Приказ, он есть приказ. Как? Ну как приказ можно не выполнить? Приказ выполнять.
Что за невыполнение приказа последует?
Трибунал же, наверное.
Когда первые звуки мы слышали, мы не верили своим ушам. Неужели самолеты? И мы вот, это было с половины третьего до половины четвертого, всегда в этом интервале. Вот я еще даже пошутила, говорю, прям как им началась война, вот как-то вот такой вот. И тут такой взрыв, такой грохот. У меня консервация на балконе, баночки с вареньем упали. Вот такая вибрация была. Том же, что, куда, чего, откуда, что это вообще? Это первый такой вот был серьезный. А потом каждое утро.
With Masha at school, Svetlana checks how much food is in the basement. With no jobs in the village, all they have is a vegetable garden to rely on for the whole year.
Ну, обычный погреб, это ж не убежище. Самый обычный погреб для продуктов. Заходите, ребята, посмотрите, где мы прятались. У нас тут кресла стояли. Тут все тряслось, все. Я говорю, если рванет, вот эти банки все не полетят в лицо. Это закупорка вся. Мы вот это закрывали все одеялами, когда вообще там страшные. А это сейчас мы не прячемся. Говорю, давайте раскроем все. Все-таки ж уже пошла закупорка, все уже. Прячемся в комнате, вот в одной. Завалит, убьет всех. Как теперь жить с вот этими всеми воспоминаниями, что они здесь натворили? Как теперь они говорят, Донбасс вернется в Украину? Верите, люди, не могу, да мне не доходит. Как можно вернуться в Украину после такого? После вот этих убийств, после вот этих стрельб, после вот этого разрушенного всего? Мина упала во дворе, нет ни окон, ни рам, ничего. Ворота, в радиусе 50 метров собирали ворота. Как ночи начинается. 3:30, как начали обстрел, вот буквально, ну это как 4 дня тому назад, в субботу. Суббота или воскресенье, вот не помню точно. Ночью было. Боже, я соскочила, я молилась за всех людей. Говорю, Господи, да пусть люди останутся живы, и плохие, и хорошие. Мы потом разберемся сами, кому жить. Ой, не могу.
Что ховаюсь под кроватью, это точно знаю. Чувствовал. И не только под кроватью. Еще роешь землю. Ну, Бог, не знаю, есть, нету. Но молитвы вспоминаешь, когда я вот под обстрелом.
В жизни бывает такие времена, что, наверное, каждый человек вспоминает Бога и молится ему. Мы тоже молились.
Причем вы читаете-то одни молитвы с теми людьми, вот, которых мы снимали.
Вы должны стоять по росту. Высокие должны стоять с этой стороны, те, кто пониже, с этой. Сейчас...
Physical education is the most dangerous class in school because it's in the open air. But it's also the favorite because there's no homework after this lesson. The pupils all enjoy joining in.
Вот так, чтобы я вас уже не ходил не двигал. Ясно? Вы должны это делать самостоятельно. Запомните?
After the last lesson of the day, Masha's mother takes her home and they return to Zaitsevo in the gray zone.
Машенька, а курточка девай.
Курточка в портфеле туда. О, корреспонденты сразу. Мам, на машине поедем?
Нет, на автобусе.
Нет, на машине. Так быстрее.
Again, there was human trafficking. There were the slaver, and they had the same color. People from Nigeria, they were enslaving their own nationality.
Even if they don't know, they don't really know that they are prostituted.
None of the girls, they do it voluntarily. They're all being pushed one way or another.
Leg of chicken for €5 with beer, and sex for €5. That's €10.
When I get money, I pay the money. Then they will just go and remove the cost of the stuff. I'm gone.
The Nigerian girls, they have a different type of contract they sign, and that is that of voodoo.
her bike on the empty street before the firing starts again.
И Маше приходится выживать в таких условиях. Никогда не думала, что моим детям и внукам моим придется такое переживать. У нас семья, нас много. Мы никуда не уезжаем, мы никуда не собираемся уезжать. Как-то будем жить, зимовать как-то будем. Мы здесь выросли, мы здесь жили, у нас корни все здесь. Мы убиваем их героев, нечего сюда было идти. Мы их сюда не звали. Мы освобождаем территорию свою. Своя территория там, где намеряют 2 метра. Вот там ваша территория. Никто не заберет. А это территория тех людей, которые здесь должны жить. И жили, и будут жить.
Круто. Руки все отомлели.
Все свое.
While dinner is underway, Svetlana manages to preserve several jars of tomatoes. They're preparing for the long winter to come, and humanitarian aid deliveries are few and far between.
Удобненько. Сейчас они остынут еще до утра, а утром, да. А вот так. И все. Газ в баллон заправляем и все.
А где заправляете? Станции?
Да, на станции. Везем на станцию баллон и заправляем баллон. Боишься еще, вдруг попадут в этот баллон, вдруг он рванет, как обстрелы. Он только что шандарахнуло, не слышали? Аж дом закачался, где-то что-то рвануло. Может, на растяжку кто-то нас топтал. Мы уже обращались к мировому сообществу, чтобы помогли нам, чтобы остановили обстрелы. Кому только мы не обращались. Я уже не знаю. Никому мы не нужны, видно. Ну, хотя есть и ООН. Может, они чем помогут.
Что такое победа для украинского солдата? Ради чего воевали?
Перед тем, как приехали сюда, говорили, что типа русские войска здесь есть. Потом зацелились в Украине. Когда уже попал в плен, уже понял, что нету тут никаких русских солдат такого. Зрение, точка зрения поменялась.
Before dark, the Rishkovs have time to harvest a little from their garden, right in the line of fire from mortars and snipers.
Да померзло все, я тебе говорю. Заморозок был.
Вы займетесь помидорами, я травой.
Ой, Маш, не морочь голову, а?
Не вот помидоры.
Будешь 2 раза что бабахнуло. Здорово бабахнуло. Стреляли, там в кукурузе лежала. Пули летают. А пули ж они все равно, им куда лететь. Ежик помидор ел. Ящик еще.
Дома жена ждет, там дома работа осталась же. Я путейцем работаю. Работал. И сейчас работаю, если вернусь домой.
Кем?
Монтер пути. Путеец.
Вот когда вернетесь, что будете делать?
Работать.
Работать дома.
В армии уже не загонят.
Это уже прошли, уже знаем.
Стреляют по вечерам. Чтобы не попало. Надеемся, вдруг спасет.
Видите, что делается? Подушками заложены дырки.
Zaitseva is quite deserted in the evening, as people hide in their homes to wait for darkness. In the grey zone, the internet is the only connection with the outside world. Masha and her mother forget the real world by diving into a virtual one.
Проиграл. Знаю я.
Тоже не спит. Опять очки новые купила.
Нет, они у меня и были. Просто цвет поменяла.
Перекличка по районам. Так, пошли. На Мри, все хорошо, на Глубокой, тихо, слава богу. Солнечный микрорайон, тишина и холод собачий. На Лукуле все есть, Янакиево все есть. Печем пироги, молодцы. Всем мирного и тихого вечера, и спокойной ночи. Не только отдыхаем, у всех хорошо. Бедная эта Зайцева несчастная.
Кокосовое будешь? Или молоко? Стреляй, там мой дом, солдат. Разверни миномет и град.
Готовність України захищати свою державу, наша солідарність один з одним і хоробрість зламали сценарій окупації нашої країни. Світ побачив: українці сильні, українці могутні, українці сміливі, українці на своїй рідній землі і ніколи її не віддадуть, ніколи не зрадять. Зараз це укриття. Ми даємо гідну відсіч. Певен, ви бачите все це у новинах. І хочу сказати вам тільки одне. Ми будемо боротися стільки, скільки потрібно, щоб звільнити нашу країну. Якщо діти вже народжуються в укриттях, навіть коли тривають постійно обстріли, то у ворога немає жодного шансу у цій, безперечно, народній війні. До перемоги! Слава Україні!
Російські окупанти розстріляли рейсовий автобус на Харківщині. 5 людей загинули, 6 зазнали поранень. Сталося це поблизу села Волохів-Яр. Пасажири прямували до Торецька Донецької області, повідомив керівник Донеччини Павло Кириленко. Серед загиблих 2 жінки і 3 чоловіків.
Missile strike on a residential tower block on the outskirts of Kyiv. Several floors have been damaged. It's unclear so far if there are any victims. We are trying to establish what exactly happened. Russian Defense Ministry sources say it was caused by a missile guidance failure in Ukraine's air defense system. Kyiv says it was a Russian missile strike. Now, in Ukraine's capital, officials are urging residents to take refuge in bomb shelters. Residents are seeking safety also in the city's metro stations. Well, unverified footage has emerged online showing fighting in the Kharkov region, which borders Russia and the Donbass. Planes have allegedly been flying over the city of Bakalaya. Shots and powerful explosions have been heard. Russian forces have allegedly destroyed Ukrainian army warehouses. Now, the sound of shelling is being heard in multiple parts of Ukraine, including, of course, the eastern, now, as Russia says, independent republics of Donetsk, where RT's Roman Kosarev explains what exactly is going on.
Well, about 7 p.m. local time, we heard really loud sounds of artillery here in Donetsk, and from the reports that we're getting from the officials here, those were 152 millimeter howitzers, or they said it could be multiple rocket launch systems that were shelled at Donetsk a little bit earlier. Now, this happened near the airport, about 6 kilometers from where I'm standing right now. As the result, at the moment, municipal public transportation has been halted in the area, and emergency services are on the scene trying to figure out the result of what had happened. Now, earlier on Saturday in Donetsk, at least 3 private residences have also been damaged as shelling continued here in the city. Now, no reports about casualties about what happened earlier on Saturday evening, but over the last 48 hours, there were at least 7 civilians killed in Lugansk and Donetsk as the result of the Ukrainian shelling. Of course, scores were injured as the result as well. Now, civilian infrastructure on the outskirts of Donetsk had been damaged, and as a result, thousands of people are now without electricity or without access to any water. Now, several buildings in Donetsk had been damaged on Friday as well, going on Saturday morning. Now, one of those buildings was a kindergarten. Thankfully, there were no people there at the time of the shelling, but nevertheless, the kindergarten was heavily damaged. All the windows were blown out, and I visited that place a little bit earlier on Saturday, and this is the footage that I came back with. This kindergarten in one of Donetsk districts is just one of the places that was shelled on Saturday morning. You can see shattered glass all around me. Pieces that fell off the building. At least 32 windows here had been shattered. And this is the place of impact, if you can point the camera this way.
Large caliber small arms or mortars. Let me remind you that this tactic is used by international terrorists in Syria.
Well, more of the latest pictures from the Donetsk People's Republic. Local forces can be seen moving through the area backed by Russian troops. In the past few hours, they've taken 3 villages. That's according to reports from local officials. Well, let's take a look at the wider picture now and the east of Ukraine, where, of course, this conflict really... Well, meanwhile, the Russian President Vladimir Putin is alleging Ukrainian radical nationalists in the army are putting civilian lives at risk by deploying heavy weaponry in densely populated areas.
Ukrainian radical nationalists are deploying heavy weapons, including multiple launch rocket systems, right in the central areas of large cities, including Kyiv and Kharkov. They plan to provoke a response from Russian strike systems on residential areas. In fact, they act in the same way as terrorists do. They hide the truth in the hope of blaming Russia. It is reliably known that this is happening under the direction of foreign consultants, primarily Americans.
Well, here on the first image, you can see a verified photo of a Ukrainian artillery squad in the middle of a residential area. Now, according to the Russian Defense Ministry, the Russian side will not be drawn into these tactics and will not attack heavy weaponry based inside densely populated areas. Ukraine, meanwhile, has scrapped age limits for army entry and also banned all men between 18 and 60 from leaving the country. Authorities are also issuing guns to any citizen who wants them to defend their land. Now, in the Kyiv region alone, it's reported more than 10,000 rifles have been handed out to volunteers. In the northern city of Chernigov, its mayor is calling on citizens to take up arms.
Fellow citizens of Chernigov, I have urgently addressed you. We need to prepare for fighting on the streets.
That's why anyone who knows what I'm talking about, prepare lighter fluids. Another thing, committed citizens, guys, I'm asking you to proceed to the dislocation center of territorial defense.
Well, we spoke earlier to Charles Schubert, a former counter-terrorism intelligence officer, to comment on the story of the Ukrainian authorities giving out weapons to civilians to defend their cities. He said, of course, there are also risks to supplying civilians with automatic firearms.
To give out weapons to anybody that offers to use them against somebody is probably quite a reckless policy. It smacks of desperation, of course, but the problem comes when weapons are given out freely. First of all, you're giving it to people who may not be properly trained in how to use them in the first instance. And secondly, you've got an issue that you've only got it on trust that those people are going to use those weapons against the invader. After all, they could be going to absolutely anybody. Once you introduce those weapons freely into an environment, a theatre of war, you cannot keep control of those weapons.
We are getting reports, meanwhile, of shells allegedly falling in Russia's Rostov region. RT's Donald Quarter is in the south of the country, right where those allegations have come from.
Luckily, nobody was injured. Infrastructure wasn't damaged either. It landed in a forested area. Now, the Ukrainian Foreign Ministry says that its military has not been shooting at the territory of the Russian Federation, but this is not the first instance in which bombs have fallen here. Yesterday, in this very same region of Rostov, at least 14 artillery strikes took place on border areas within the region. And right after the beginning of the Russian military offensive, there were other such instances. In Bryansk region, there was shelling there where houses were destroyed and 3 people were injured. The same thing happened in Belgorod. Infrastructure was damaged, shelling happened, and 3 people were also injured there. Interestingly enough, more recently near Belgorod region, a Ukrainian soldier had been trying to escape to the Russian Federation, trying to basically defect, and neo-fascist groups there that had their hands on artillery batteries had fired at him and unfortunately killed him and injured another serviceman in the Russian Federal Security Services as well. Now, because of this violence that's actually been happening on the Russian Federation, the authorities have taken measures. They've closed down Russia's southern airspace. Basically, there's going to be no flights out of this area. There's 12 airports in Rostov region alone that will not be having flights. Another thing they've done is close down all the schools that are located in border regions that border the Donbas People's Republics. We have to remember that there are at least 3,000 children from Donetsk and Lugansk alone that have left, that have evacuated that region to the Russian Federation and are connected to educational institutions in these border regions. So that's another task the Russian authorities now have on their hands. What are they going to do? Where are they going to put them so that they can make sure to continue their education?
Now, France says it's intercepted a Russian vessel in the English Channel, reportedly on suspicion of sanctions violations. This comes after the EU hit Russia with fresh raft of punitive measures over its military intervention in Ukraine. Charlotte Dubinsky has more.
This cargo ship was seized at around 7 a.m. local time here on Saturday in France. It's a cargo ship called the Baltic Leader, and it is apparently on a list of companies that have been sanctioned by the US as a result of that Russian military action in Ukraine. Now, we understand that originally the cargo ship was pulled over by the French officials because they wanted to check documentation. However, it then emerged that it is on that sanctions list, and as a result, the boat was seized and taken to Boulogne-sur-Mer, which is the largest port here in France, just down the road from Calais, its better-known cousin. 19 crew on board. We understand that they have been allowed to disembark from the cargo ship, and they are allowed to move around freely. Now, the Russian embassy here in Paris has sent a note to the government requesting more information, and it says it will do all it can to protect the rights of those sailors on board the 19. Now, for the moment, we don't understand, or we're not aware of what cargo that ship may have been carrying, but we do understand that the reason it was pulled over is because this ship belongs to PSB Leasing, which apparently is on the US sanctions list. Now, for the moment, the cargo, if there is any cargo, and the vessel itself have been seized, and the future of that will be determined now by a French court.
Well, meanwhile, a number of countries have closed their airspace to Russian airlines over the Ukraine intervention. Among them, the UK, Czech Republic, Poland and Baltic nations as well. Moscow has responded with what it describes as tit-for-tat measures. Now, multiple countries, European and across the Atlantic as well, have agreed to further tighten the sanctions pressure on Moscow. That's after talks in Brussels. Paula Slier has the latest on the response to the Russian intervention in Ukraine.
Well, they're certainly spelling out in some kind of spiral. They are growing, with the UK imposing harsh sanctions on Russia. They've now imposed an extra travel ban in terms of not only Russian aircraft not being allowed to land here, but also private jets. At the same time, VTB Bank, the second largest state-owned bank, and a number of other Russian banks have also been sanctioned. The UK is no longer accepting visa applications from Ukrainians who are stuck in that country unless they have close family here in the UK. And the Belarus ambassador to London has been summoned and told that new members of the ruling elite are also to be sanctioned for supporting Russia's military moves. The opposition leader has said that more sanctions are necessary, as one of the members of parliament from his party has started receiving death threats for criticizing and speaking out against NATO expansion. The Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, earlier recorded a Twitter video in which he called for an end to what he has termed a crisis. It was also an opportunity for him to show off his knowledge of the Russian and Ukrainian languages.
Putin's actions are leading to complete isolation for Russia, shunned by the rest of the international community, hit by immense economic sanctions, and facing a needless and bloody war that is already costing countless lives, from innocent Ukrainians to your Russian soldiers who will never see their families again. And to my Russian friends, я не верю, что эта война от вашего имени. This crisis, this tragedy, can and must come to an end. Тому що світу потрібна вільна та суверенна Україна. Slava Ukraini.
Now, the European Union also says that it is imposing harsh sanctions, that these, it says, will cripple the Russian economy. They include sanctions on individuals, state-owned companies, and key sectors of the Russian economy. All members of the Russian parliament will now face asset freezes and travel bans. At the same time, in an extremely rare move, the EU has frozen the assets of the Russian President Vladimir Putin and his foreign minister Sergei Lavrov, although neither, certainly not at this point, are being subject to an EU travel ban. The European Union and European leaders saying that all of this is necessary.
We're adding President Putin and Foreign Secretary Lavrov to the list of sanctions. They are responsible for the deaths of innocent people in Ukraine and for trampling on the international system. We, as Europeans, do not accept that.
Canada, the United Kingdom and the United States have also decided to freeze the assets of President Putin and Minister Lavrov, and certainly this is part of a coordinated action. But one step further is being taken by the United States, who has also imposed a travel ban on the pair.
Following a telephone conversation President Biden held with European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, and in alignment with the decision by our European allies, the United States will join them in sanctioning President Putin and Foreign Minister Lavrov and members of the Russian National Security Team.
These sanctions are expected to trickle down and affect ordinary Russians. Certainly here in the UK and elsewhere in Europe, Russians are wondering what impact it will have on them and on their families back home.
Well, economist Richard Wolff claims that barring Russia from the SWIFT banking system could cause huge financial issues worldwide.
In a global world, more globally interconnected than ever before, if you block the SWIFT system, you are declaring a kind of economic warfare that will damage and destroy all kinds of economic relationships. The reason Mr. Scholz in Germany did not want and stopped the attempt to freeze Russia out of SWIFT was because it would throw the price of oil and gas up into the roof beyond what it has already been, because you couldn't pay Russia for the oil and gas through SWIFT, and they wouldn't send it anymore, and no one knows where that's going to go. So if they do that, if they actually go through with that, they will disrupt global trade, they will drive inflation through the roof. And let me remind everyone, Russia, China, Iran, and many other countries don't like the domination the United States has over the SWIFT system, and it really is only a matter of time before there are multiple systems. Bitcoin is already functioning to a degree like that. So this would be a very dangerous step because it would accelerate the end of the SWIFT monopoly.
Now, I want to show you some of the response across the world to the Russian military intervention in Ukraine. Anti-war protests are spreading across the country, both here in Russia and indeed abroad. This is a picture from Nevsky Prospect in St. Petersburg, which has become a focal point of the protests in recent days. There is a heavy police presence there right now, with several arrests being made. There's also a rally taking place here in Moscow, in the Russian capital. Now, since the military operation began, demonstrators have been out on the streets across 50 Russian cities, with around 2,500 people detained. Well, during this time in Ukraine, during the crisis, this channel has also come under tremendous pressure. The latest example, leading Australian pay TV company Foxtel will no longer distribute RT, citing the situation in Ukraine. We got reaction from our channel's deputy editor-in-chief to the latest situation.
RT journalists tirelessly work to bring valuable facts and views to an audience of millions around the world. When an organization or government either call for or force RT to be taken off the air, it simply highlights the fallacy of media freedoms in the nations they represent. Just look at the Association of European Journalists, who, on the one hand, self-righteously declare themselves as defenders of journalistic rights, yet so readily turn their back on this very founding principle to support the suppression of news and journalists under political pressure. If ever there were a time to recognize the importance of all fact-gathering news and understanding of all views, it is now.
Now, Foxtel has sent a letter to RT saying it ended distribution over concerns about the situation in Ukraine. The channel also added it considers it has the right to do so under the license agreement with this network. And this comes amid, of course, growing pressure, as I said, on this channel internationally over the last few days. RT has already been banned by Poland's National Broadcasting Council after Russia began its so-called special military operation. The British Culture Secretary is also calling to consider RT's licence. Meanwhile, even before the current crisis erupted, RT's German-language sister channel, RTDE, was blocked in Germany. A political analyst we spoke to says such moves set a worrying precedent.
I've done a number of debates on RT, and I've discussed many times with people with whom I disagree on many opinions. With a lot of people, I mean, there are a lot of debates on a lot of different subjects. RT has brought people together from different political horizons, have brought them to debate, to discuss. Some agree, some disagree, and that is the purpose of journalism, and that is the purpose of the media. Let the people who are watching make their own opinion. RT is not an ideology. It's a place where people can meet, discuss, debate on ideas, and that's fundamental. If we take that out of our democracies, there is no more democracy. So it's extremely important. Maybe they may shut down TV stations. We'll have to find something on the internet. If the internet is closed down, we'll have to find something else. It will be tough. These times are extremely tough now. I don't know if they will get better, but we have to continue the fight for free speech. Everybody is entitled to free speech. Aren't our democracies based on that? Isn't that what we're taught? Isn't that what's written in our constitutions? We've got to fight for the right for free speech, and that means we have access to all the media, and let the people choose what is right and what is wrong.
Now, Russia's military actions have also been roundly condemned by the US media. When it was Washington that was at war, though, the coverage was different. Caleb Morpin has more now on varying narratives in conflict.
U.S. media coverage is always so fair and balanced.
evil act by this evil leader attacking an innocent nation, a democratic nation.
We wake up this morning to a war in Europe, a deadly one. He wasn't just threatening Ukraine, that significant enough, but he seemed to be challenging the post-Cold War order. Putin wants to take over Ukraine.
Faces on the screen are filled with pain, anguish, and empathy for the people of Ukraine as Russia moves in to try and stop the bombardment the people of Donetsk and Lugansk have been facing for the past 8 years. Now let's recall how these same outlets and voices responded to U.S. missile strikes on Syria in 2017, an act without any justification under international law.
As US outlets cover Russia's attack on Ukraine, remember how these same outlets cover US attacks. When the US bombed Syria in 2017, MSNBC's Brian Williams called the footage of the strike beautiful. He then quoted Leonard Cohen, "I am guided by the beauty of our weapons." CNN's Fareed Zakaria was similarly enthusiastic about Trump's attack on Syria. "I think Donald Trump became president of the United States last night. He talked about international norms, international rules, about America's role in enforcing justice in the world."
Who can forget the invasion of Iraq in 2003, based on lies about weapons of mass destruction?
On the left is The Economist after Bush invaded Iraq. On the right is The Economist after Putin invaded Ukraine. Spot the difference.
This is all about one evil dictator who possesses brutal weapons with which he will threaten and hurt a lot of people, including a lot of Americans, unless we take them away from him. All of us, including the Iraqi people, are going to be very fortunate.
I think it was the smartest thing George Bush did.
How about when Barack Obama rallied the world to destroy what was then the most prosperous country on the African continent with NATO bombs?
I've been asking this question over and over. Why would we intervene in Libya? And I still haven't received an answer that totally satisfies me, but the most consistent one is because it'd be the right thing to do, because people are dying for altruistic reasons.
Some U.S. bombings don't even get coverage. If it wasn't for AFRICOM tweeting it out, people would have no idea the United States was currently carrying out strikes in Somalia.
Somali U.S. forces engage insurgents in support of the federal government of Somalia.
Why criticize what your own government is doing when you can just as easily virtue signal and pluck heartstrings, feigning outrage about something that a government on the other side of the planet is doing? If only the Russian military was headquartered in Washington, then perhaps mainstream U.S. media would be educating us about the beauty of the weapons. Caleb Maupin, RT, New York.
And let's go back in time now to the roots of this conflict, the Minsk agreements in particular, which obliged, of course, both sides of the Ukrainian conflict to withdraw weapons from the front line. RT has a documentary following the lives of people living in the conflict zone of Donbass over the past 8 years, the so-called grey zone. You can see the full version at rt.com. In the meantime, here's a quick preview, and just a warning to viewers, you may find some of the images distressing.
Like most who live in the grey zone, the Virovsky family tries to pay little attention to the war that came straight to their house. They're getting used to their usual village life under fire. Their vegetable gardens have long been turned into minefields. In 7 years of civil war, the basement is where they mostly live now, and they are well aware that any time they venture outside, it could end in injury or death.
Russia is trying to take it away from us. But we say no. We will not give up. 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 Ukrainians, American Ukrainians, people, we inspire the world. We are the inspiration. We are approaching the third largest army in the world. I bet they're not. Guys, can you imagine the bravery? Just think about it. Ukraine stands against Russia, and we fight them back. We're Ukrainians. We will never give up. We will always go forward and pursue. We will go forward to our happiness, because no one is allowed to take it from us. No one. And again, people, please, we really can do. And we can spread the information in social media. We are an army. We're a social media army. Every single person here is a soldier. We don't have weapons in our hands, but we have social media. And let us address Facebook, Instagram. Help Ukraine. 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 Help. It is not about money anymore. Guys, people are dying. I'm addressing right now those who think about their financial losses. Come on, you're humans. And we are Ukrainians. We are humans as well. Oh, no, guys, we're not humans. We're superhumans. Yay! Ukraine is a super country. And every single Ukrainian, every single man and a woman, every single child, it now has to be written as Superman, Superwoman, Superchild. Yes, we're hard-working people. We never wanted war. Never. War came to our house. And we will fight. Putin thought that we will retreat. Never. We will never fight. Sorry, we will never retreat. We will always fight. Always. So, my friends, my brothers and sisters, we have to do our share. Do whatever you can do. Help Ukraine. We need not only money, but supplies and help to our armed forces. Supplies to help civilians who are wounded. Supplies to restore our infrastructure. We do his or her share and stand together with Ukraine. 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 For Ukraine. Stand up for Ukraine. Stand up for Ukraine. Stand up for Ukraine. You know, 2020 was a horrible year. And before that, there were horrible years as well. And the world, all of the world, although we're the same, we have the same flag, of the same flag. You know, we have the same goal. We all live, we all born, all have moments of joy, moments of sadness. But now, Ukraine has united. we stand. United we stand. United we stand. My fellow Ukrainians, it is a dark hour. Dark hour for our nation. Dark hour for the world. But after every dark hour, there is always sunshine. We believe in sunshine. We believe in sunshine. We believe in our country. We believe in our country. In our military. We believe in our president. We do believe in him. He is a great Zelensky. Zelensky. I hope that you all hear that. Hear us. Hear this. Hear all of us. All the other people. Different countries. All over the globe. Guys, can you imagine? All over the globe. We're united. We're not separate. We're together. We stand together. We stand with Ukraine. And we will push. We will do whatever we have to do. We demand. Take Russia off SWIFT. 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 Come on. Protect our sky. 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 Don't smile, anyone.
Suitcases, we could see pickup trucks with personal belongings on them, and then a lot of checkpoints. And we drove through, we took a side road because the main road was quite busy. We took some side roads, we went through villages, and I was observing all the villages, nothing was open, all the businesses were shut. Yeah, food shops were open, pharmacies were open, very few people on the road. And as we approached, we could see these territorial defense units that had been trained, building trenches, building up positions. That's their role, protect the cities, the entries, the exits. And then we slowly arrived to Dnipro. And as we arrived in Dnipro, we were told, well, now there's a curfew, you gotta stay indoors. That part of the country still hasn't seen the violence, but people are taking the precautions. People know that the war is coming to their doorsteps. The question is, when is it coming? And certainly they know it's not going to be pretty.
Hoda Abdelhamid with the latest there from Dnipro in eastern Ukraine. Hoda, for the moment, thank you. Well, one of our colleagues was briefly detained a little earlier as he was reporting in eastern Ukraine. Charles Stratford is in Dnipro as well, and here's his story.
We've returned from the city of Zaporizhia, where the situation is becoming increasingly tense. A lot more military checkpoints, a lot more military hardware than we saw there yesterday. As an indication of how tense it is, we were preparing to go live, to do a live broadcast where out of nowhere, seemingly, a group of Ukrainian soldiers and Ukrainian police appeared with their guns, many of them pointing towards us, firing in the air. They demanded that we get out of the vehicle. We threw ourselves to the ground. Our cameraman's telephone was kicked out of his hand, and 2 bullets fired from a Kalashnikov into that telephone. Now, it's important to recognize that these men were just doing their jobs. There are increasing fears amongst the Ukrainian military and security services about what they describe as saboteurs, trying to get into cities and compromising military positions. But as I say, our cameras were still rolling when this incident happened. Let's take a look. Hi, Doha. Hey. Stop filming.
Журналісти, можна я вийду?
Journalist.
Можна я вийду?
Journalist.
Вийти можна?
Journalist.
Go out of the car. Journalist. Откройте дверь, пожалуйста. Что делать?
Also reports from the port city of Melitopol, witnesses telling us that what they describe as being increasing numbers of paramilitaries on the streets, Ukrainian paramilitaries helping the Ukrainian army trying to defend the city from what we understand is a push by Russian forces from the west. We know that the city has also suffered heavy shelling from the east. We've also been speaking to people fleeing the area north of Crimea, around the city of Kherson. People telling us or alleging that Russian forces that have taken control of some of those towns are preventing Ukrainian citizens from leaving them. The situation on the roads around Dnipro, very tense. Checkpoints a lot more strict. At one checkpoint, we saw a Russian helicopter fly low over the checkpoint, causing panic, causing people to scatter away, even the security services that were manning that checkpoint. But there are increasing fears of the tens, if not hundreds of thousands of civilians that are trying to put as much distance as they can between them and Russian forces advancing on these Ukrainian cities as the front lines become increasingly blurred.
Let's go live now to Bernard Smith, who is in Moscow for us. We've just had the picture there of the situation in Ukraine. Bernard, when it comes to diplomacy, is there any hope that that may still play a part?
Well, the latest, Barbara, is that the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, has said that he says the presidents of Turkey and Azerbaijan between them have agreed to arrange some sort of talks or negotiations between Ukraine and Russia. Now, although already the Russians have said, the Kremlin have said earlier on today that they were prepared for talks, and in fact, Vladimir Putin ordered a halt to the invasion on Friday because Moscow understood that there were going to be talks in Minsk between the two sides. But then Moscow says that the Ukrainians wanted to have the talks instead in Warsaw. Then Moscow says the line went dead. So Vladimir Putin instructed that the operation, as the Russians call it, started over again. But we don't know what the terms are for the talks, what terms the Russians have laid down. But we do know that, of course, Vladimir Putin has called on the Ukrainian army to overthrow Volodymyr Zelensky's government. He's told them they have to lay down their arms, and that Sergei Lavrov has said he doesn't believe he can recognize the current Ukrainian government as democratic. So who exactly the Russians expect who are willing to talk to, we're not sure.
And Bernard, when it comes to sanctions, I mean, the West has made it clear that it's not going to go beyond economic measures right now. But when it comes to sanctions and the potential threat of more, how is Russia reacting to that?
Well, we're seeing this political and physical
soldier to fight in Ukraine.
Around Russia
the United
really
States will
to take shape now. Politically, Dmitry Medvedev, a former president of Russia and now the deputy head of Russia's Security Council, he shrugged off sanctions and he said actually that this is a good reason for us to pull out of dialogue on strategic nuclear stability, he says, and potentially pull out from the new Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, the START treaty that was signed in 2010 and was extended until 2021. And Medvedev has also said that the decision to suspend Russia from the Council of Europe is really unfair. The Council of Europe was created at the end of the Second World War to promote democracy and peace and stability in Europe. He said now that's a good reason for us to slam the door on this organisation, and Russia can perhaps reintroduce the death penalty for serious crimes. And he says that meanwhile more and more countries in Eastern Europe are banning flights to Russia, and in response Russia is banning flights to those Eastern European countries as well as to the United Kingdom. So you see this physical isolation of Russia begin to take place as well as the political one, Barbara.
Bernard Smith with the latest there from Moscow. Bernard, for the moment, thank you. Well, the European Union is reportedly discussing a third package of sanctions against Russia. The bloc, along with the US and the UK, has already brought in a range of measures, including directly targeting President Vladimir Putin. Well, Matteo Villa is a senior research fellow with the Italian Institute for International Political Studies. That's Italy's biggest foreign affairs think tank based in Milan. Matteo Villa joins us now from Venice via Skype. Thank you so much for joining us here on Al Jazeera. So first of all, just tell us a little bit about how effective this third potential strata of sanctions are, and just also the divisions that we have seen within the Western alliance when it comes to sanctions.
Yeah, so they might be very effective. As you might have heard, sanctions against SWIFT, so banning Russia from accessing the SWIFT network, the network that allows banks to communicate with each other and transactions, is being actually discussed. Yesterday, we had holdouts, Italy, Germany, Hungary, all the biggest countries in Europe that could have been hit and could have been taken a larger hit, given the fact that when you block SWIFT, you might be blocking as well some debt and credits from transactions in natural gas. As you might know, these countries are big importers of natural gas from Russia, and yet they are falling in line with all other EU countries. And this, I think, from Moscow, it was unexpected. And it's going to be a big blow, both from Russia. It's true also for the EU 27 countries that are agreeing to this, possibly within the next few days. But again, it's going to be a much bigger blow for Russia. And I guess the Kremlin was not expecting this for sure.
OK, so now there seems to be agreement about the SWIFT banking sector and withholding that from Russia. We had seen divisions, like you mentioned, Germany and Italy, that had, at least yesterday, not gone along with it. But more generally, what are the kind of divisions that we're going to see within the Western alliance now or in the months to come, if it goes that far, about the different impact? I'm sort of wondering who might be more vulnerable to potential sanctions, further sanctions to Russia.
For sure, Italy is on the line, Germany as well, and many countries in Eastern Europe, not exactly the one you expect. Poland, for instance, might be better at taking a hit from, for instance, natural gas imports. They burn much more coal than we do, but yet all EU countries are much more going to suffer much more, and Italy much more than all the rest. For more than 40% of our energy mix, so the total consumption of our country comes from natural gas, and most of it comes from Russia, about half of it. So again, this is a hit that's been going on for about 8 months now. Our energy bills have doubled, and gross energy costs have quadrupled. So we're going to suffer for sure. But currently, Putin does not really listen to another language, it seems so. So we are going to hit at least as big as he did over the past few months. And let's see whether this brings us back to the negotiating table instead to war and violence in Ukraine.
Whether it's energy or other sanctions, I mean, it is obvious that there is also, however big, a price to pay for the Western countries as well. But do you get the sense, having seen developments over the past few days, that most of the alliance have decided that the political imperative outweighs any economic damage that may come for themselves?
To me, it's been striking, the difference from 2014. So the last time Russia entered Ukraine, obviously with a much smaller operation, Italy was one of the holdouts trying to carve out many exemptions from sanctions. And even yesterday, we heard a lot of reports, for instance, Italy asking for the luxury sector to be left out. Well, we don't hear that anymore. It means that really European chancellors are really understanding that this is the only talk in town. And many countries that first, let's say, a few years back were favoring economic interests over security are now really thinking that this is the time to hit hard. It doesn't mean that you need to isolate Russia forever. It means that this time Putin is going to pay, and the oligarchs and maybe the business leaders who have now been isolated in the Kremlin will start to grumble, and we'll see where this leads.
I suppose that leads me just to the final question, the key one. How damaging do you think that the packages that we're seeing now are actually going to be to Vladimir Putin?
It depends. It really depends whether we do cut off Russia from the SWIFT altogether or just to target with targeted sanctions. And again, it's one interesting thing is that the US is even thinking about, or at least discussing, sanctioning the Russia's central bank. That would be really, almost a nuclear option. It might cause bank runs in Russia. We've never seen something of that scale on such a big economy. It happened with Iran in 2012 and 2014. It had a huge effect, but Iran was had already ties much more severed from the larger economy from previous sanctions. With Russia, the 8th economy in the world, that would be a first. But again, this is the scale at which Western governments want to play this game now.
Matteo Villa, Senior Research Fellow with the Institute for International Political Studies based in Milan. Sir, thank you for your views.
Thank you so much.
Meanwhile, at least 100,000 Ukrainians have fled to Poland to escape Russia's invasion, but some say they are being mistreated by border guards. Some people who reached the Medica border crossing say that they were threatened and witnessed violence. They were also stuck in heavy queues, with some waiting more than 12 hours to get through.
What's crazy is that there were a lot of guys who tried to get through, and then there was a soldier with a gun who'd be like, get back, get back. If they got too close, he literally punched them in the face.
Border guards got really, really aggressive, and they would even lock the door and tell us we're closing it forever, you can go back. That was really scary.
They made so many threats, seriously.
Zain Bazravi has more now from eastern Poland, where Ukrainians are crossing the border.
We're here at the Przemyśl train station. It is just across the border from Ukraine. People from Ukraine are arriving here by train from the town of Lviv, and it's been coming in waves. Now is another busy period. Let me give you a sense of what's happening around us. Here in this hall, we have people that have arrived that are being registered. Now, they're not being registered as refugees. These are people who are being registered for transport out of this area into other parts of Europe. The government is helping to get people to friends and to family, helping to relocate them, finding them temporary housing. But the government, the officials aren't the only ones here that are doing that kind of work. We've seen volunteers with signs made out of cardboard offering people a free place to stay, free rides into Poland and further across Europe, including Berlin and Prague and Denmark. So really, here it gives you a sense that what's happening here is touching every European country in some way. Now, from this busy part of the train station, we're going to go to another hallway where people are getting some much-needed rest. Now, in the main hall, people are enjoying probably their first hot meal in days. And here in a quieter part of the train station, there is a makeshift shelter where people can get some sleep, get some rest, and get some reprieve from what has no doubt been an incredibly arduous journey to try to cross from Ukraine into Poland, into safer parts of Europe. We've spoken to people here who say that they've left family members behind, young mothers with families who've been forced to say farewell to their husbands, knowing that it might be for the last time. Men of fighting age from 18 to 60, many being stopped since the fighting in Ukraine began, since the Russian invasion, conscripted into the Ukrainian armed forces to try to hold the country, hold the capital, and hold on to main cities.
Meanwhile, protests are taking place around the world as people express outrage at the Russian invasion. Nadim Babar reports now from one of those protests here in London.
support Ukraine now!
In the heart of London, demanding more be done for Ukraine. Many of these protesters are Ukrainian with family and friends back home that they're desperately worried about. People like Ella Medvedeva, who came to Britain more than 20 years ago.
I still remember stories from my grandmother and great-father about the Second World War and how the fascists came, and it's just happening again. And it's not just the military, right? Objects, infrastructure, they're killing people.
There were similar solidarity protests across Europe. This was Munich in the south of Germany, itself no stranger to upheaval and dark episodes in history.
We are worried about our brothers, sisters, our relatives. You look at the people gathered here, and everybody is scared that war will break out in Europe.
In the Italian capital, a large crowd called for more pressure on Russia. And in Paris, they gathered in the Place de la République, calling on NATO to protect Ukraine's airspace. That was a key demand in London too.
I think we should be supporting militarily Ukraine as best as possible. There's a madman at the moment in the Kremlin, and I mean, we have to do what we can.
The crowd here has been chanting glory to Ukraine and denouncing the Russian president, but they've also been calling for specific measures they want Britain to take right now, including greater financial sanctions and more military help for Ukraine's armed forces. And while the Ukrainian flag now flies from government buildings, many are angry there's no legal route for most Ukrainians to seek asylum in Britain.
We need to be letting refugees come in and just scrap visas for them all to get here, and then once they're here, deal with it whatever afterwards.
For now, all Ukrainians outside the country can do is hope the fighting ends soon and urge the world to do more to make that happen. Nadeem Barber, Al Jazeera, London.
Patty Culhane is at the White House where another rally is happening. So tell us a little bit, Patty, about what you're hearing people there saying outside the White House.
Well, just like in Europe, we're seeing signs and demands for the U.S. to impose a no-fly zone over Ukrainian airspace. I can tell you on my other hat, spending the last week at the Pentagon, that seems highly, highly unlikely. The U.S. has very clearly said that they have no interest in getting into a shooting war with nuclear-armed Russia. But we are seeing protests here in Washington and across the country. Now, President Joe Biden isn't here. He's back home in Wilmington, Delaware. But that's not really the point. Let me set the scene for you. What we do have here is a lot of cameras. And the Russians are very clearly losing the public relations war, and that matters as sanctions begin to bite into the economy. According to one poll, 85% of Americans say that they don't see Russia favorably. Now, there are some fringe Trump supporters who disagree, but the vast majority of Americans blame Russia in this conflict. 67% say they support sanctions. That's a pretty high number. But here's where the concern comes in. And this is a concern for the White House. They say that if gas prices go up, that support for sanctions drops to just 51%. So why do these rallies matter? Well, on their signs, they're repeating the words of the President of Ukraine. They're invoking the stories of heroics, a few colorful signs about the response to that Russian warship from that island. They're trying to paint this as a human struggle and say, look, you're paying more at the gas prices. These people are fighting for their lives, trying to get that message out to Americans, because for the president to continue on this path, he's going to need public support. That said, their big demand here is more weapons to Ukraine. The Pentagon have been having some difficulty. Obviously, they're not going into Ukrainian airspace as they were before. But they did announce just today an additional $350 million in military support. And they're laying out there what they're sending them. They're going to send them tanks, missiles that can take out tanks and ammunition. So they say that's $1 billion this year they've given to Ukraine. The protesters here say that's simply not enough, not given what Ukraine is facing on the battlefields.
Patty Culhane at that protest outside the White House. Patty, for the moment, thank you. And finally, back here in the UK, there was a rare show of unity between footballers in the Premier League on Saturday. Everton and Manchester City showed their support for Ukraine before their Premier League match. City wore T-shirts with the Ukrainian flag, while Everton emerged draped draped in the flag of Ukraine. City's Ukrainian player, Alexander Zinchenko, was visibly moved by the display, having earlier embraced his countryman, Vitaly Mykolenko, who plays for Everton. And now, a reminder of the top stories on Al Jazeera. Russia is closing in on Ukraine's capital, Kyiv. Its missiles hit a residential apartment block overnight, while people are preparing to spend another night in shelters. The president, Volodymyr Zelensky, says he'll stay in the city and fight to defend it. The UK and US say the largest part of Russia's military is 30 kilometers from the center. Well, another large convoy of Russian trucks has crossed the border into Ukraine. Moscow says it's not targeting residential areas, but says it's using precision weapons to hit military targets. And restrictions are in force in the capital and other areas. Od Abdelhamid is in Dnipro, which is in eastern Ukraine.
There is a curfew in place from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. Here in Dnipro, and the reason stated is because of possible saboteurs going around. So anyone on the street after 8 p.m. would be suspicious. Now in Kyiv, that the curfew is much longer. It's actually from 8 p.m. Saturday, so from today, to Monday morning, 8 a.m. So just to give you an idea of how difficult the situation is there.
At least 100,000 Ukrainians have fled to Poland to escape Russia's invasion, but some say they're being mistreated by border guards. Some people who reached the Medica border crossing say that they were threatened and witnessed violence. They were also stuck in heavy queues, with some waiting for more than 12 hours to get through.
What's crazy is that there were a lot of guys who tried to get through, and then there was a soldier with a gun who'd be like, get back, get back. If they got too close, he literally punched them in the face.
Border guards got really, really aggressive, and they would even lock the door and tell us we're closing it forever, you can go back. That was really scary.
They made so many threats, seriously.
And protests are being held around the world against Russia's invasion. In London, many people who turned out were Ukrainian. They're demanding more support and say that they're desperately worried about their family and friends. They also want the borders to be opened to refugees. Right, that is it for this half hour. I'm going to be back, though, with a special half-hour program at 20G, just under half an hour. But coming up next, it's the Listening Post, examining the media narrative surrounding the Russia-Ukraine war. Thanks for watching. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
And the NATO alliance, we are dispensing with our usual format. Our starting point this week is Ukraine. With the last-minute diplomacy failing and the prospect of an invasion growing from likely to inevitable, news outlets were relying on open-source intelligence, evidence to show their audiences the buildup of Russian troops and armor on the border with Ukraine.
I know you've been studying these satellite images closely, the troop movements, the buildup.
Monday, 5 p.m. Moscow time. Vladimir Putin assembles his Security Council at the Kremlin, a made-for-TV meeting that, if nothing else, produces some political theater. Later that night, in an hour-long speech to the cameras, Putin denies that an independent Ukraine has a right to exist. Roughly 48 hours later, on Wednesday, Putin's Ukrainian counterpart, Volodymyr Zelensky, sends out a last-ditch message.
Я знаю, что это мое обращение не покажет по российскому телевидению, но граждане России должны его увидеть. Они должны знать правду. А правда в том, что нужно остановиться, пока не поздно.
It was too late. The next day, just before 5 a.m. local time, Putin announces what he calls a special military operation to protect Russian-speaking Ukrainians from a potential genocide at the hands of Kyiv. And as the scale of the invasion made itself known,
it's tragic, it's irrational, it's also evil.
Many analysts on both sides of the geopolitical divide had to admit they got it wrong. A primary reason for that was the incessant spin coming out of the Kremlin and the channels it controls. Was that misinformation, or was it also an underestimation of Vladimir Putin's willingness to go to war? Taking us through the Russian side of this global story now, including cases of misinformation coming out of Moscow, is Johanna Hus.
Well, Richard, as we've reported before, this war is as much about words as it is about weapons. For months, as Western media and intelligence officers warned of an imminent invasion, Russian news outlets dismissed, at times even parodied, those reports.
Байден якобы объявил, что вторжение России на Украину начнется на следующей неделе. Bloomberg упоминает 15 февраля. Политика пишет про 16 февраля. Сегодня CNN 22 февраля.
Unlike 2014, leading up to the annexation of Crimea, when reporters on the Russian airwaves were beating the drums of war, we were seeing very little of that kind of belligerent coverage. But that all changed this past week. Russian propaganda has kicked into gear, notably on state-owned, Kremlin-controlled news channels tasked with justifying the invasion.
Итак, Российская Федерация начала операцию по демилитаризации, денацификации Украины, операцию по спасению жителей Донбасса. Мы в самом деле долго откладывали, в самом деле долго терпели, терпеть дальше уже невозможно.
Misinformation beaming out of Moscow is not new. Russia has been honing these kind of tactics for 8 years, ever since it's annexed Crimea. It is an integral part of its hybrid war strategy. Alexei Navalny, Russia's jailed opposition figure and part-time journalist, has been tracking the propaganda closely, not by choice. State-controlled TV is the only thing he is allowed to watch now that he's behind bars. Navalny's colleagues managed to put out a series of tweets in his name in which he said that the invasion of Ukraine and the media spectacle around it are designed to distract Russians from the country's real issues, a faltering economy and a pattern of extreme corruption at the Kremlin.
Thanks, Joe. The conflict currently playing out in Ukraine involves former Cold War adversaries and competing versions of history. The Russian president provided a glimpse into his thinking last year when the Kremlin published an essay in Vladimir Putin's name, where he argued that Russians and Ukrainians are of the same Slavic nation. He did it again this past week, questioning the very idea of Ukrainian statehood, which does not go down well in Kyiv, Washington, or at NATO's headquarters in Brussels. But for Putin, it's all part of a new historical discourse, one that emphasizes Russia's history as a great power and mythologizes the country's past. Among the victims of that historical rewrite are Russians themselves, the ones who have spent years researching and remembering the victims of political repression in what was the Soviet Union. Suddenly, they found themselves on the wrong side of the story and often on the wrong side of the law. The Listening Post's Tarek Nafa now from Moscow on the battle over historical memory in Russia.
December 28, 2021. An abysmal year for free expression in Russia comes to a fitting conclusion with a judge ordering the closure of the country's oldest human rights organization. For more than 30 years, Memorial had preserved records and artifacts from Joseph Stalin's Great Purge, when show trials, mass arrests, and executions touched every level of society. Memorial's Human Rights Center, which has also been shut down, kept track of political prisoners in Russia today, assembling a vast online database of repression in Russia.
What happened in court last year was that the state exposed itself.
The prosecutor spun the idea that Memorial does not paint the history of our country in a positive light, that it demonizes the USSR as a terrorist state. When we started Memorial, the true scale of the repression was absolutely hidden. Memorial did a lot to open up the archives. What is happening today is not just a regression, it is a crime against citizens of Russia, because citizens have the right to know their history.
Memorial started functioning as a political organization, and that really is a pity. I remember Memorial when it was created at the end of the 1980s as an organization aiming to help the relatives of people who were imprisoned and to remember them. Nowadays it has become an anti-Russian political organization.
Mikhail Myrkov's argument echoes that of the state, which has grown more defensive of Russia's historical legacy. When Memorial first surfaced in the late 1980s, things were different. Citizens were seeking out the truth about Soviet state terror, and relatively little stood in their way. In 1990, members of Memorial installed this, the Solovetsky stone, here in Moscow, to honor victims of political repression in Soviet Russia. It was a period of glasnost, openness and transparency, when Russians were learning about the atrocities committed under Joseph Stalin. The decision to put it here in Lubyanka Square was significant. We're right across the road from what was the KGB's headquarters, now home to the FSB, the Federal Security Services. But 30 years on, some of those dark chapters from Russia's past are being erased. History is being rewritten.
When Vladimir Putin came to power, practically all the archives were closed. The people who exercise power in Russia today are former KGB officers or members of the Foreign Intelligence and the FSB. They are ideological supporters of the KGB and the USSR. They want to pretend that there was a short period of repression. But in reality, the whole governance system of the Soviet state was based on violence.
For the current Russian leadership, the Kremlin, history is a tool for introducing certain myths into people's minds. What we see today is the revenge of the state security agencies, which were in retreat in the early 1990s. The state no longer wants to know the truth about itself, it builds its own history and arranges it to fit its ideological purposes.
A campaign to sanctify Russia's war heroes is playing out in popular culture and in public space. The government has championed patriotic films that lionize the military and affirm its use of force.
Вас восстанавливают в армии, награды, но главное, вы возвращаетесь домой. И вас встречают как героев.
Many of these state-funded blockbusters center on Stalin's leadership in what is known in Russia as the Great Patriotic War.
Это будет ласточка наших бронетанковых сил.
Moscow is filled with tributes to historical figures, patriots who ensured the survival of the state. It's where you can find pop-up propaganda showcasing Russia's military arsenal. Some of these murals are sponsored by historical associations run by senior officials close to the president, including this one, opposite the Kremlin. It was commissioned by the Russian Military Historical Society, where Mikhail Myrkov is scientific director.
The victory of the Soviet army in the Second World War has a crucial role in how Russians self-identify. We have to hold on to some constants, such as our victories during the Patriotic War of 1812, the First World War, or the Great Patriotic War. These allow us to feel self-sufficient in this world. We can say to other nations, we gave you freedom. We live in a world that was created by the Soviet Union in 1945.
Missing from that narrative are inconvenient periods of history, like August 1939, when Joseph Stalin and Adolf Hitler agreed to a non-aggression pact, arguably paving the way for a world war that started 1 week later. Over time, Stalin's legacy, once so discredited, has been rehabilitated. In 2019, A survey by the Levada Center found 70% of Russians thought he had played a positive role in Russian history.
People are constantly told that without Stalin, the Russians would not have won the war.
Сталин неотделим от победы, а победа неотделима от Сталина.
Putin has nothing else to offer Russian citizens. He cannot offer them wealth and prosperity, and that is why he is only offering them myths of some great periods in history.
Having shaped a grand historical narrative about Russia's place in the world, Vladimir Putin now wants to protect it. A new national security strategy, signed by Putin in 2021, says traditional Russian values and historical memory are under attack and must be defended. Before Russia invaded Ukraine this week, Putin once more revealed his obsession with righting past wrongs by questioning Ukraine's historical right to exist.
При этом украинские власти изначально, хочу это подчеркнуть, именно с первых шагов стали строить свою государственность на отрицании всего, что нас объединяет. Стремились исковеркать сознание, историческую память миллионов людей.
I would never have believed it 30 years ago if someone would have told me all this would begin to repeat itself. We have not learned any worthy lessons from history. Any state, any community of people often live with myths about the past, but all myth-making begins with a set of values. What is valuable for the group of people now leading Russia? To remain in power forever, to consume, to occupy. We can see that now with the revanchist speech on Ukraine, and to convince everyone that the state is an absolutely sacred object which cannot be encroached on in any way.
One political leader who may be grateful that the eyes of the news world are now trained on Ukraine and not on his country would be India's Narendra Modi. With elections either underway or looming in some key states, Modi's Bharatiya Janata Party, the BJP, keeps playing its Hindu nationalist, anti-Muslim card. The vast majority of Indian news outlets are not just okay with that approach, they adopt it themselves, sometimes out of fear of the authorities should they criticize Modi, or because conflict sells and attracts viewers in one of the world's most competitive news markets. India likes to brand itself as the world's biggest democracy. Is that really the case? True democracies have independent media outlets that hold governments to account. That is not the case in Narendra Modi's India. Politics do not get much uglier than what India has to offer in 2022. This post, with its stereotyping and dog whistling, showing the hanging of Indian Muslims, promising terrorists will see no mercy, is not the work of a radical fringe. It comes from an official account of the BJP, the country's ruling party, and was posted by its communications team in Gujarat, a state that will hold an election later this year. Gujarat was once home to Prime Minister Narendra Modi. It is where he shaped his politics, made his name.
Stereotyping a community through its clothing and then showing members of that community hanging from a noose is not something that would be acceptable in any democracy in the world, and it shouldn't be. It has become acceptable in this country, and it requires a lot of work from activists to be able to take such material off social media.
Gujarat is Mr. Modi's home state. And for the Twitter handle of the ruling party, for the Instagram handle of the ruling party, to post an image of Muslim men hanging by the noose, I mean, the message could not be clearer.
I checked the reactions, on my social media, and even people who are usually fence-sitters, quote-unquote apolitical, even they were completely gobsmacked by this. Their reactions were, okay, this is our ruling party, what is happening, how is this normal, how is this completely acceptable in this day and age? But of course we can't look at this cartoon in isolation.
Not with what's been coming out of Uttar Pradesh. UP is India's most populous state. More than 200 million people live there. It is in the middle of its own state election, one that is seen as a bellwether for national elections that are 2 years away. Narendra Modi's man in UP is Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath. When this interviewer asked him about another politician, a prominent Muslim one, Aditya Nath used a term to describe Muslims, a slur related to the Islamic practice of circumcision, one that does not quite translate into English, but was extraordinarily offensive.
लेकिन इसके मार्ग में सबसे बड़ी बाधा इस देश का वो कठमुल्लापन है।
क्या है कठमुल्लापन?
The interviewer just carried on.
The word Katmulla refers to somebody who's fanatical and obstinate, and because it contains the word mullah, it refers specifically to Muslims. It is not surprising that this man used the term. He's used much worse. It is not surprising either that the television host who asked him the question, which got this response, didn't react more strongly than she should have.
Far too many news outlets seem to have decided that it is the opposition that has to be grilled, not the ruling party. You see it every night on primetime news. The topics, the hashtags, the headlines, all the combativeness is directed at the opposition.
ऑडियो बंद करिए इनका। आप जानते हैं ZNCL क्या है? ZNCL 100 से ज्यादा देशों में देखा जाता है। ZNCL के 100 से ज्यादा चैनल हैं। कांग्रेस पार्टी 10 कांग्रेस पार्टी समा जाएंगी ZNCL में।
So TV news continues to thrive on confrontation in India. It's just that it's no longer speaking truth to power. Instead, it is speaking on behalf of power.
And providing power with a platform, even when that's against the rules.